First of all, Mr. Thorpe, on behalf of the Oneida County History Center and the Tug Hill Commission, thank you for being with us today. We're excited to hear what you have to say about the CCC and your involvement in that.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So where were you born and when?
Oh,
You can
my
scare
goodness.
us now.
You're going a long way back. I was born in Manhattan, actually, New York City. And at the age of 2, I moved to Brooklyn. I grew up in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
I consider myself a Brooklynite.
There you
That's where I'm from.
go. So was your employment affected by the Great Depression? Like immediately, did you feel any impact of what was going on?
We were poor, so.
You were poor.
My father worked all the time. He was a taxi driver.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually worked nights, and he was home, came home, and slept during the day. And of course, I didn't see that much of him because I had to go to school during the day, and I would, most of the time I was in school. From kindergarten to high school in Brooklyn, New York. And I walked every step of the way.
Did you?
From kindergarten to high school. We didn't have buses in those days.
Right. Really? So how did you get involved with the CCC?
Well, when I graduated from high school in 1940, June of 1940, I worked that summer after I graduated, odd jobs, and didn't think it was going anywhere. And I saw an announcement in the newspaper for people to enroll in what they call the CCC program. And I read a little bit about it, and I said, well, maybe that's something that I might do to get away from being wandering around the streets of Brooklyn. And I got an application, filled it out, and applied to become a member of the CCC program. I was accepted.
Right.
And they sent me tickets and not much else. And told me where I had to go.
Mm-hmm. What
So
tickets on the train?
On the train tickets, yes. Yeah. And traveled by train from Brooklyn. Actually left from downtown Brooklyn. I don't know if you've heard of the Brooklyn Nets.
Baseball?
The train station was right across the street from where the Brooklyn Nets Stadium is right now.
Okay.
Long Island Railroad. And we took that train from Brooklyn to where the campsite was located near Elmira, New York. So we traveled upstate through the lower part of New York State up to Binghamton, and then from Binghamton up to Elmira. And we were met at, I think I was the only one that I recall at that time on coming that way. And they picked us up in a truck at Elmira and drove us to the camp, which was not far from Elmira, in a little town called Van Etten, New York, which is a very small farm village.
So was that like where their orientation was going on?
Yes.
Right.
That's where everything began and ended.
How long were you there?
I was there. I arrived in the fall of 1940, and I stayed in Van Etten for about a year. And they were going to start closing some of the CCC camps. So the following year, fall of the following year, those of us at Van Etten were sent to different camps. And I was sent to a camp at Empeyville.
The big metropolis of Empeyville, New York.
The big metropolis of Empeyville, which was Empeyville.
So when
familiar with what Empeyville looks like?
When was
that?
that?
About woods.
When did you get to Empeyville?
Probably about October of 1941. October, November, as I recall. Something like that. I wasn't there very long, though.
Did the camp have any nicknames? Did you guys call it anything?
Not that I know.
No.
I wasn't there. Anyway, they already had campers already were there at Empeyville.
Mhm.
I don't know if you know anything about the CCC program, but it was instituted by President Roosevelt during the Depression, during the Great Depression, during the 30s.
Right.
And it was a national organization that he set up camps across the country to get young kids off the streets and into some kind of a
That's great. Did any of your friends
viable.
enroll, or were you kind of on your own?
I was on my own.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're on your own. Believe me, you gotta learn fast.
Mhm. So how did you get actually to the camp in Empeyville?
A truck.
Oh.
Yeah, trucks.
No, move you.
They had the old-fashioned Chevrolet stake trucks on the side of the canvas over the top, benches on the side.
Mm-hmm.
You jumped in the back and sat on the bench, and they drove you to where you had to go.
So you're from the New York City area,
Yes,
and you ended up way out in
in the middle of nowhere.
What did you think of being out there?
So what am I doing here?
A lot of
City
stars.
city boy in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a strange, strange thing to come from a city and to be in the country.
Mm-hmm.
City, you have street lights, where the country, there's no lights.
It's scary.
Yep,
Yeah, in a way.
it is different.
So what type of work did they have you doing at the camp in Empeyville?
Well, of course, you had the orientation, which probably, it didn't take more than probably a week or so. Give you clothes to wear, uniforms, shoes, complete outfit. And we were assigned to what they call work groups. The work groups were, they were assigned to local farmers through the New York State, what they call it, Agriculture Department or whatever.
Okay.
Farmers would go to the state, said they needed help doing so and so. And the state would say, well, we got a camp of young men, boys, they call them then,
Mm-hmm.
that you can, use. And we have young men who are studying things like agriculture and things like that. And they would work with the farmer,
Mm-hmm.
find out what the farmer needed, and then they would tell the people at the camp what they had. Young CCC boys would have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And we would go out, and the farmer had ditches to be dug, and he had plants to be planted, or things to be planted that he needed help with. And we went out and did that kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
Dug a hole in the ground and stuck a shoot in the hole and covered it over and moved
Planting
to the next
trees?
one. Planted trees.
Yeah.
And dug ditches and
Mm-hmm.
things like that.
So we had some graphic information that the folks brought along, and it listed sort of the daily schedule of the camp, and I was wondering if you had any insight. It said that they got you up at 6 o'clock in the morning with reveille. Was that really like a...
Yep. The camps were run by the Army. So the Army, they did it the Army way.
Mm-hmm.
The camp that I was in Manhattan, was run by I don't know where he was. He was a civilian, I think, yeah. G.I. Howard, his name was George I. Howard. I remember him. And he worked for the state, New York State, of course. Mm-hmm. And, but the Army young men, the corporals, well, there weren't that many, really. They would tell him, how to line everybody up for drill and take attendance and all of that. So he would take care of all that, and he worked out of a what they call a camp office.
Mm-hmm.
If you knew anything about the Army worked under strict segregationist rules. So the camps were not integrated.
Oh,
The camp that I was in was segregated camp, African American, except for the leadership. The leadership of all of those camps were all white.
gotcha.
So we got our instructions from our camp leaders, our camp guidance counselors, and they would tell us where to go, what march us off to get us into the truck, and the truck would drive us out to the farm.
About how many men total were at the camp?
Well, the camp that I was in was there were 5 we call them barracks.
Yep.
You know, about 10 to each barrack, I said.
Okay.
And there was about 100, between 80 and 100 young men in the camp total.
Yeah.
But then they had other buildings. They had a mess building. They had a supply building. They had a building that served as a main office where the director sat, and his staff sat in that office. And he had people work in his office with him. He would tell them what forms to make out, and they would do that with the old-fashioned typewriters.
Yeah, right. The words go right on the paper like magic.
You had to pound on the keys.
So carrying on in the day, at 6:30 was breakfast, a sick call, and policing of the site. How was breakfast?
Well, so something to eat.
Not high marks
They
there?
marched it to the mess hall, yeah, and the mess hall had the long, like I don't know if you've been to some of the state parks.
Mm-hmm.
Those picnic tables that you see,
Yeah.
the picnic table with the 2 seats on one side and seat on the other, and the table. That was what the mess hall was like. So you sat on the bench, and the cook and his crew would come and put stuff on the table, and you'd have a tin plate, and you take stuff out of the plate and put it on your out of the main tray and put it on your plate.
And they were able to feed everybody all in one batch?
Yeah, all at once. Yes, everybody all ate at once. Lunch, well, lunch was something else, because after your breakfast, they gave you a brown paper bag, which had a sandwich and a piece of fruit, and that was about it, really.
Mm-hmm.
If there's anything to drink, you had to get out at the work site. They had these big galvanized cans where they had Kool-Aid. If you heard of Kool-Aid, that was it. You dip it out with a dipper to fill up your cup, and you drank out of that.
So after you had breakfast and stuff, you'd get your assignment for the day?
You did your assignment for the day until lunchtime, and then you had lunch. Broke for lunch for about a half an hour to an hour, and you went back to work again, and you worked for another 3 or 4 hours, and work ended, and you got back on your truck, and the truck drove you back to the camp.
So you were working for farmers, essentially, it sounded
Essentially.
like. Did you have to bring your own tools, or did they provide what
They provided the tools. Yeah, they provided the tools. Showed you how to use them. Picks, and shovels, and rakes, things like that. Yeah. Sledgehammers to break the stones up.
Apart from the work day and the meals, not that you had a lot, but what was there, like, spare time at camp? What else did you do?
After you got back to camp, sometime part of that evening, you had to go to dinner, of course, to the mess hall again for dinner. And after dinner, then you had spare time. And spare time is when you got to meet everybody in the camp. And you had to be careful who you met.
Oh, really? What type of things did you run into?
There were guys that they came from all over, like New York, the camp that I was in. Most of the young men came from Harlem and Brooklyn and Buffalo and Albany. And they were, well, we used to call them city slickers.
Mm.
And I didn't grow up in that kind of a neighborhood, so I had to be careful with the city slickers. Would find ways to get you whatever you had that they wanted.
Do you think they got sent there by their family, or did they go there on their own?
They got there most likely on their own.
Mm-hmm.
So the camps were run by, like I say, by the Army, but they would choose some of the older campers to be supervisors, or what they call barrack leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Each barrack rather had a barrack leader, and he was a little older. He's probably 3 or 4 years older than the general camper, and he would tell them, where they had to go, how to line up for the trucks. He would have them stand in line, and he would assign them duties that they had to do in their spare time while they're in the barracks. He would tell them what the things they had to do. Some of us had to take care of the old belly stoves. I don't know if you remember those.
Yeah.
With
What season were
coal.
you? What season were you there?
I was there in the winter of 1940. Yeah, I left there. I left in the winter of 41. I went to Empeyville, from Van Etten to Empeyville, and I was there for the winter of Empeyville, and from Empeyville, I was sent from Empeyville to a campsite in Beltsville, Maryland. But the thing that I took advantage of while I was at both Van Etten and Empeyville was that I had taken office classes in high school, so I knew how to type. I could use a typewriter,
Right.
so I got to work in the office.
Skills. Nice.
After I figured out how to get out and go out on the field.
Oh, so you didn't want to necessarily work with the farmers, you stayed in the office.
Not necessarily, because it's hard work.
That's smart.
And so I would do I typed the records and keep track of when they took attendance. I would type up the records for attendance, things like who said present, who said no.
Sure.
You had to make sure that if you were well enough to get up, you had to be present. And you had to say so. And the barracks leader had to verify that you were there. He had to verify that to the camp superintendent. And that's how they kept track of who was there and who wasn't.
So Empeyville is one of the snowier areas in the country.
Absolutely.
What did you think of the weather while you were up there?
I never saw so much snow in my life. Because when I was at Empeyville, we would travel from Empeyville, which is just outside of Camden, actually. Yeah. From Camden to Rome, New York, to go to the movies. And we traveled out there. I don't know what highway it was, but the snow was like 8 and 10 feet snow banks. I couldn't believe that they had that much snow. And go to the movie, and after the movie, they drive you back to the camp.
So would that have been like during the week or on the weekend?
On the weekend.
When we had more
Oh,
time?
yeah, you're working. Not during the week.
So did you get to visit Camden while you were in Empeyville?
Not really.
No, you went to Rome.
Right to Rome, right? Yeah. Rome, I think we even went to Utica. We even came to Utica once to go to the movie. There were a couple of movies on Genesee Street, the old-time movies. I can't remember which one.
That's quite a trip in the winter.
Oh, yes. All nature, all the way up and back. And but the thing I remember about Empeyville was I was there on the morning of December the 7th, 1941, in the office, listening to the radio, and they came on and said that we're going off the air. The president wants to make an announcement.
Yesterday,
and President Roosevelt came on and announced, this is my sad duty to announce through the country that
1941,
the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor.
a date which will
And
live
that's when I heard it.
in
And you were way
infamy.
out in
And I was
Empeyville.
in Empeyville, sitting in the office, and I heard that. Yep.
What did
And
you-
within the week after that, I was sent from Empeyville to Beltsville, Maryland. I was shipped out of Empeyville.
So was it caused by the start of the war, or was it just coinciding?
I'm not sure why it was, what happened to it. I think they were getting ready to shut down a lot of those camps. Like Manhattan was shut down, Empeyville was shut down, and the camps south of New York, like the Beltsville is in Maryland, just south of Washington, D.C., and that was still open, so that's where I was sent.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I spent the rest of my life as in the CCC camp
Mm-hmm.
at Beltsville, Maryland. And at that time, I was assigned to work with in the truck garage, auto garage, I used to call it. And I was trained to do a lot of real automobile work with a very nice gentleman. I can't remember his name, but he taught me all I knew, all I learned about fixing and repairing automobiles back in the old days. You could take things apart and put them back together.
So
Can't do that today.
That was at Beltsville,
Yes,
and you were taking care of the automobiles and stuff for the camp.
for the camp, right.
So you got away from the typing,
Yes,
right? But
Yeah.
you enjoyed working on
I
it?
never forgot how to do it, but
Did your experience at the CC camps influence your decision to join in World War II?
let me think when that happened. Oh, after the camp at Beltsville closed, they shut down. They sent everybody back home. I went back to Brooklyn. And I looked for work again around the neighborhood that I grew up in. And they had what they used to call them garment factories back in those days. They would make shirts and pants and army wear, uniforms, things like that. And I applied to try to get a job in one of those factories, and it wasn't working too well. So I said, well, I can't hang around Brooklyn with nothing to do. And so I enlisted in what was called the U.S. Army Reserve Corps. And that was in the fall of 1942, yeah, fall of 1942. And I told them that I wanted to join the U.S. Army Signal Corps. I wanted to be a member of the U.S. Army Signal Corps because the word was out that if you told them you wanted a particular assignment, you would be more likely to get something that you wanted, that, as opposed to being just sent wherever they felt that they wanted to send you.
Right.
And so I was sent from Brooklyn to Troy, New York, to be tutored or trained by undergrads at RPI, or Rensselaer Poly
Really?
Institute. Yeah, RPI.
Wow.
And there were three of us, two young men from Harlem and myself from Brooklyn, three of us. And we found a rooming house, and we lived in Troy, New York. And we stayed there while we were taught by the students that came down the hill. I don't know if you know what Troy is like, what
On the hill?
RPI is. There must be 100 steps from the ground level up to where the campus is. And I never walked up those steps. No, I said, I'm not going up those steps. But they would come down every day, and they had classrooms set up in the local public schools in Troy, in the city of Troy, through the public school system. They would come down and they'd teach us the rudiments of electricity
Oh.
right from the start.
So the Signal Corps wasn't waving flags. This was more modern
There you
stuff.
go.
Yeah.
Because the theory was that if you got some kind of a training in what the field that you wanted to go into, that there was a possibility that you could go to college and get a college deferment, because they did allow college deferments for students that wanted to do their complete their college work. And I was never offered a college deferment.
Oh,
And I'm pretty sure it was because of that.
right.
Right. So the three of us, we were separated. The three of us separated. The two young men, I'm not sure where they went. I think they went back to New York City. And I was given orders to go to basic training. And I wound up in basic training at a camp across the country near Salt Lake City.
Whoa.
The camp was titled Kearns Field, Utah, which is probably within walking distance of Salt Lake City.
Right. Right.
And it was a segregated camp.
Oh,
Yes.
still, right.
The blacks were on one side and the whites were on the other side. Yeah.
Were the other CC camps that you were at segregated? Completely?
In New York State, they were.
Yeah.
I don't know about the rest of the country.
Right.
New York State, they were absolutely segregated. Yeah.
So, but back to your basic training. After you completed your basic training, where did you get sent?
Well, it was real Army basic training. The sergeant who trained us, he was a white sergeant. He was from, I think, either South Carolina or Georgia or something like that. And the barracks that we were in, of course, was all African Americans. And so he had a squadron of African American young men that he had to train how to drill and carry rifles and march back and forth and turn and line up and do whatever he said.
Yeah.
You had to do what he told you. Oh, you heard about it. And one incident that I recall was that he was giving a report to one of his superiors, a white a lieutenant or something like that. And he said, my boys are doing pretty good. He said, they're coming right along. And some of the young men in the squadron heard him say this, and they confronted him and says, "We are not boys. We are members of the United States Army." And he said, "Oh, I didn't mean anything like that." He said, "Where I come from, we call them boys." I said, "But you don't call us boys." I remember that one. I remember that incident.
Wow.
While I was in basic training, I saw an announcement that the Army was looking for young men to be trained to become members of the U.S. Army Air Corps. Now, all of the air operations was under the control of the United States Army. There was no U.S. Army Air Force.
Not yet.
It wasn't in existence at the time. I filled out the application, sent it in, and I think probably about 3 or 4 days came back, said I was one of the ones accepted to go to Tuskegee Institute
There you go.
Cadet School. And I was given orders to travel from Kearns Field, Utah to Biloxi, Mississippi to go to cadet school at Tuskegee Institute, Alabama.
Amazing.
And that was an amazing trip for me. I don't know if you know, well, you probably know the geography of the United States.
Well, so what do you mean?
From Salt Lake City, I was sent from Salt Lake City to California. I had orders now. By train. That's the only way they traveled back in those days anyway. I went to California. The first time I saw an orange was on the trees. I didn't know where oranges came from.
Right. The store.
And from California, then I was sent across the southwestern part of the United States, Nevada, to Arizona, Texas, to Louisiana. All by train. And my order said that I had Pullman privileges and Dynacar privileges, which is something the ordinary African American did not get those kinds of privileges. And they honored those from California to Louisiana.
Yeah, Army orders.
I had Pullman privileges and I ate in the Dynacar.
Nice.
I couldn't believe it.
Mr. Thorpe, been enjoying having this conversation with you. We have some additional questions. Jennifer Harville from the Tug Hill Commission is here with some questions off camera as well.
Thank you.
If you don't mind, I'm going to kind of go back a little bit because when Patrick was talking, I thought of other things to ask. So
Oh, yeah.
first of
Okay.
all, how old are you, Mr. Thorpe?
Uh-oh. I was afraid somebody's going to ask me that. The Lord willing and the creek don't rise. 98.
98 years young. And how old were you when you applied to be in the CCC?
CCC Camp 17.
17. Can you tell us what does CCC stand for the record?
Yes. Civilian Conservation Corps.
Thank you. All right, great. When you were 17, you were living in Brooklyn.
Right.
Did you have siblings with you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There were 5 of us. I'm the only one left.
You're the only one left. Were you the oldest, youngest, in the middle?
I'm the oldest.
You're the oldest. Okay. So were they brothers and sisters?
Yes. Mm-hmm. 2 brothers and 2 sisters.
2 brothers and 2 sisters. What was your favorite memory looking back from all your experience at the Civilian Conservation Corps? What do you think's your favorite memory?
Staying out of trouble.
Staying out of trouble. Excellent. Okay.
Learning how to maneuver.
Learning how to maneuver.
Among some pretty slick guys.
If your favorite memory, the best part was staying out of the trouble, what was the worst part of?
Was the worst part of it?
Yes, sir.
Well, as I recall, it was the first time I went to a dentist who came to the camp. He would travel around from camp to camp. Who came to the camp and said I had to have a tooth pulled. First time I ever had to have a tooth pulled. And he told me he was going to do this, and I was scared to death to have a tooth pulled. He said, "Don't worry, it'll be over before you know it." And it was.
Oh, good.
But I was scared to death of that, yeah.
Okay. So they took good care of you in that way in terms of health care, and they kept you fed, kept you warm.
Yeah. Unless you were really sick.
Okay.
And they would take you off to one of the local hospitals. But pretty much they had what they call an infirmary in one of the buildings where they had someone who was trained in like first aid, things like that, and giving you aspirin and things like that. And if you had a headache, you'd go there, and they would sort of take care of you. Mm-hmm.
I drove through Empeyville last night on my way home.
Oh, you did?
I did. Have you been back? Have you? Do you
Yeah,
ever go
I
back?
I don't know if Mr. Talmadge had told you. We were there about, 3 years ago, Willie? 3 or 4 years ago. We drove by because there's a camp site that's run by the New York State Correctional Department, I believe, at Ansville,
Right.
which is just down the road from Empeyville. And I said, well, we're this close to Empeyville. Let's drive up to Empeyville and see what's there. And we did. We drove up to where Empeyville, as I recall, where Empeyville was. And sure enough, one of the pictures that has the post that's in front of the road that leads back to the camp. The camp was back off the road, back into the woods, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah. But that was actually the second time, well, the third time, really. I was there during when I was in CCC. I went there when I first took the position at Rome Air Development Center, which is at the Griffiths Air Force Base. And a friend of mine and I were stationed at Empeyville during CCC time. He was in the Army, but when I was here, he was a civilian now. And he said, well, let's go up the road here, see where we where we used to be.
Mhm.
And we went up there, and a couple of camp buildings were still there.
So they're still there. You can find them.
Yeah, they were still there. When we were there the last time, there was nothing there.
Nothing there.
Nothing. They apparently, from what I understand, that the property was sold off by the state, and a private person bought it. He built a big house right in the front, which is close to the road, but the rest of the area behind that was where the campsite was. And he said, well, there's a couple of things back there, and we walked back there and found a couple of places.
Did you find them?
Yeah.
What'd you find?
Find out what was where they got water.
Water
what was it called?
holes.
Water.
Yeah.
I don't know if some of the camps had the manual wells.
Like a pump?
Pump, where you pump by hand, pump water by hand. I don't think that we had one up there that I recall anyway. We found that, and probably one or two other little places, where buildings might have been, yeah.
Elena had a question, and if, I'll ask for her, but she knows from there's the Build Back Better bill in Congress, right? It's stalled right now, but there's something in there called the Civilian Climate Corps that Mr. Biden.
Civilian what?
Climate Corps. So they were talking about sort of resurrecting a civilian conservation corps type program, but they would deal more with resiliency and climate change. What do you think about that?
I would be in favor of it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Maybe they'd take you back. No?
I would think that would be a fantastic idea.
Great. Okay.
Yeah, because their kids, they should be in school, but a lot of them are not, and they're finding things to do, and a lot of them are not good things.
Right.
Like John Lewis said, get into trouble, but get into good trouble. But these kids don't get into good trouble a lot of times. I'm not sure what they could do though, because so much of the areas that were relatively undeveloped back in the days that I went into CC are no longer in that condition. Practically every place you go, somebody's got something built or something there. So they would have to do a lot of research to find things for the young men to do.
Right.
And women.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
So along those lines, so you mentioned before the camp at Empeyville, the camp in Van Etten, they were segregated camps, but there was the leadership was white. What did that feel like as a young man coming into that scenario?
I can only speak personally. I didn't notice a lot of difference between what I felt and what some of the other young men have felt. But the household that I grew up in, we didn't do a lot of discussion and speculating about differences in the race and things like that. It wasn't a prominent discussion. The main discussion was, if you got a job to do, you do your job, and you get paid, and contribute to the family.
Right.
That was, wherever you got the job, that wasn't a part of the real part of the problem, as it is so much today. A lot of the problem exists today because of what happened years and years and years ago. And so I didn't pay that much attention to the fact that these guys are white and they will tell me what to do, because that happened out on the street anyway. Yeah.
You mentioned how this contributed to your family. Were you able to help your family and contribute that way with your pay?
Yeah. You buy your own, little small things. Your sneaker. We call them sneakers back in those days. Sneakers, and socks and Kurtz's shirt maybe once in a while. But families pretty much took care of their own. They took care of the kids pretty much. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. There weren't too many kids that I guess you see references to today in a lot of the news media. There weren't a lot of kids that were considered homeless, for example. There's no place to go. There wasn't, at least in the neighborhoods that I grew up in. Because I don't know if there's anything about New York at all, New York City at all. Well, New York City is made up of 5 boroughs. The inner city boroughs are Bronx and Manhattan. The outer city boroughs are Staten Island, Queens, and Brooklyn. So the outer city. So there are differences between people that grew up in Harlem and Bronx, as opposed to the activities and the experiences of cities that grew up into the outer boroughs. You know. You have a little more relaxed and a little more leeway outside than you did in the city. And then of course, in the cities, you didn't see as many people of different colors than as you do now, as you do today.
The camp in Maryland had closed. You'd gone to some training at RPI, got on a train, went to California, looped back, and you ended up in Tuskegee, yes? Biloxi,
Yeah.
Mississippi, then to Tuskegee. Is that where we ended up?
Well, the interesting thing about that journey, I guess you might call it, was that when I got to New Orleans, and I had to go from New Orleans to Biloxi. This is, I don't know, how far is that? Willie knows. It's probably less than 2 hours, I would think, by train anyway. My orders ended in New Orleans. No, my orders ended in Biloxi, actually, Mississippi. And so I went into the train station in New Orleans to get a ticket to go from New Orleans to Biloxi. And I presented my orders, and the clerk at the counter said, I was in the main part of the terminal at the time, and everybody was looking at me and said, what are they looking at? And the clerk told me, I cannot take your orders at this counter. Your counter is around the other side of the terminal in the back. And he directed me back there. And I was traveling alone. And so I did. I went out and went back to the backside. And there was what they call the colored terminal. And lo and behold, all he did was turn around. Because he was like in between the two.
Oh.
All he did was turn around and then took my ticket, gave me the ticket to go to Biloxi.
Seems like an awful lot of
And that was
effort.
my first, I guess, real direct experience with Southern segregation. I heard about it when he said, well, it can't be that bad. And it is.
It was.
It's terrible. Not good.
Right.
Yeah. And Biloxi, of course, Keesler Field is the Army base there. That's where they screen you to see if you have the skills to go on to flight training. And I passed all of those tests. And I got orders, and I went to Tuskegee Institute, which it turns out, historically, is the only training site for African-American pilots during World War II. Over 900.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
Only place they were trained at Tuskegee Institute.
Is it my understanding that the Tuskegee Institute was also a project started by FDR as a way to...
Well...
Maybe not?
He started to do that under duress from his wife.
Yes. Yes.
Eleanor came to visit us at Tuskegee, and she took a flight with one of the colored African-American instructors. He would teach us how to fly, but he said, well, I'll take you up, I'll show you, what flight is like. And she went up with him. And after she came back and landed, and she went back to Washington, she went to her husband and said, Franklin, I don't see why these young men can't fly. And she said, you ought to open up a school there. And he did.
That's incredible.
That's what he did.
That's incredible.
He directed the Army. He says, you got to open a flight school at Tuskegee Institute. And it turned out to be the only one in the country. Yep.
How long did your training last?
Well, it was done in 3 stages. We call primary, basic, and advanced flight training. Primary is the first time you ever get in, well, for me anyway. Some of the young men had been in flight school at their schools. They came from what they call, now called historically black colleges and universities. Mm-hmm. Hampton University, Howard University, Atlanta University, and they had flight training at those places. So they had been in the aircraft before. Not very long, not very much training, but they, were familiar with aircraft. I'd never been in an airplane in my life. And the primary training was when you first started raw, and the African American, and there were some white pilots that were also part of that training crew. They would take you up, fly you around in little Piper Cubs back in those days, and do certain maneuvers and see how you reacted. They say, well, this guy is suited for the continue his training, and this guy is not. So the ones that were not, they had a term they call them, they would wash out, and they were sent back to their army. But I and several of us succeeded. And after we finished our basic training, primary training, we went on to what they call basic training, which was a different aircraft, was a little heavier, and you could do more maneuvers with it, and you were taught more maneuvers with it. After basic training, they separated us into two groups. Ones who would go on to advanced combat flight training, and those that they felt were more suited to what they call multi-engine aircraft flight training. I was chosen for multi-engine. Now, my brother had graduated from high school in Brooklyn also, but he graduated after I did. He was younger than me. He ran directly from high school to Tuskegee Institute, and he was qualified as a combat fighter pilot. And he finished that, and then went to South Carolina to be trained by instructors who had actually been in combat, and they would train them what they had to know to avoid getting shot down.
So your brother...
He was sent from there to Italy.
Okay, what was his name?
Richard.
Richard. So he's doing this. He's getting his training, and you're still at...
I'm still at Tuskegee.
You're still at Tuskegee.
And then I was sent from Tuskegee to Texas.
Okay. Okay. But he's ahead of you, so to speak.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Training wise.
Yeah.
And he flew in Italy. Go ahead.
Yes. He flew in Italy, and he lost his life in Italy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, during the war. He died in 1945. Yes.
1945.
Yeah. He was young. He's younger than me. He was about the same age. He must have been 20. He was born in 26, 20. He was probably only 20. Young. He's very young. Yeah. Yeah. Because he was just out of high school.
What about neighbors? Did you have anybody from your community who joined?
Not my community. I don't. There were some people from Brooklyn, but I hadn't met them before I went to the CCC camp.
Mm-hmm. So I'm sure you probably met. Oh, go ahead.
I was there on my own.
Well, that's exciting, especially at such a young age, at 17, to be surrounded by a whole bunch of new people for the
Right,
first time.
right.
Have you stayed in touch with any of those people?
My friend that I was buddy with while I was in camp, I stayed in touch with him after the war. In fact, after I moved to Rome, we visited together. He lived in Jamaica, Long Island, and I stayed in touch with him for a couple of years. But he's since passed away.
Sorry to hear that, but it's
He was in the Army.
uh-huh.
He retired from the Army.
Did you guys serve together, or were you ever stationed at the same place during World War II?
No. Other than the CCC camp, no. No.
Sorry, we're recording that too. Okay, no, we are too.
And
On
did
Zoom. So this part will be.
I have a feeling that when you guys were there at the CCC camp, I mean, you're all each other saw day in and day out. Did that build pretty strong bonds between you?
Oh yeah, you gotta have a buddy.
Yeah, tell me more.
You got somebody watch your back.
Right.
That's, as they say in the modern lingo, you gotta have somebody watching your back.
That's absolutely right.
Hmm.
And I was actually, in some of my research, I noticed that CCC enrollees would do reconnaissance missions. So I'm wondering, did you guys?
Reconnaissance missions? No.
No? Okay.
Oh no.
They would look for missing persons, and yeah, I was just curious if you had to do any work like that.
We would do what the farmers told us to do.
There you go. That probably kept you busy all by itself.
I dug potatoes one year.
Oh.
One of the farmers that I work for, on weekends, he would take me up to his farm, and he had some young men, sons, and I would go out in the potato fields and work with his sons, picking potatoes.
How exciting. Well, it's a good way to meet the local people too, right? And build some relationships there.
Right.
And I couldn't hear exactly everything that was said, but I know that back in 1940 dollars, you guys were earning $30 a month.
$30 a month, $1 a day.
$1 a day.
That's what they said.
Yep.
That's right. $20 went home and you kept 10.
Yeah, so I was wondering did that $20 that you got sent home, was that really helpful for your family?
Oh yes, well that's what it was for, really.
Uh-huh. And was that more than, that $1 a day, was that about, more earnings that you could have gotten if you had stayed in the city and looked for a job there?
Well, it may have been probably about the same. You may have earned a couple of dollars more, but you probably have to spend more living in the city.
Right? Exactly. Your dollar goes a little further in the country.
Right.
Great. No, I think we've all asked you an awful lot of questions. I mean, is there anything else that you would like to share with us about your time there?
One thing that I would like to share is that I believe my CCC experience helped me a lot in the rest of my military career, because I knew what to do. I knew one thing to do. You don't volunteer, for one, and you do as you're told.
I think that's wonderful that because it seemed that the CCC was kind of designed with like military in mind, right? You guys had a very regimented schedule. You even had uniforms.
Exactly. Yes. You learned how to pace yourself. You only got paid once a month, so you had to make sure that whatever you bought when you got paid would last you for the rest of the month.
Yeah.
So you,
Yep.
you learn what was important and what wasn't.
Yeah, you had to, pinch pennies to make sure that you had enough at the end of the month.
Right, because a lot of the guys, especially the guys that are coming from the real inner cities, they would like to, well, they call it gambling now, I guess. They come up with all sorts of games to just try to part you from your money. So you have to learn how to keep it.
I'm sure you guys had a lot of laughs with that.
Absolutely.
That's so great. Yeah, well, I'm just so glad that you could be here with us, Herb, and I wish I could be there with you. I've got a little one on the way, my first daughter coming in 2 months.
Well, I wish you the best.
Thank you, Herb. And I'll sure be sharing her story with you, that's for sure. Or your story with her, rather.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
On behalf of the Tug Hill Commission, my coworker Elena Millette, I'd like to thank Mr. Thorpe for being with us here today, providing us this wonderful glimpse into the history of our state and our country. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.